Um, Today we're doing part one of a two-part program. And this is a program that I offered once before through Natural Dharma. Did anyone attend 2 years ago, the last time I did this program? No? Okay. Oh, were you here, Laura? Okay.
I think
I
I
don't know if
was.
you remember.
I think I was the host.
Well, great. Sorry I didn't recognize you,
That's
but
okay.
I was just curious if there would be repeats. You can tell me if it's changed that much. The plan I have for the morning is that I'll just take a minute to introduce myself and uh, check in with everyone if there's anything to talk about, and then we'll go into meditation and then do a talk about this text and the plan. Um, I am under the impression that this may be one of the first Theravadan texts that some people may have engaged with. I'm just curious if you can give me a hand. Are you a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner? Everyone here? Yeah, one, two. Okay, so about half. Great. Um, all right. It's been a long time since I'm on Zoom. I will say I'm rough at this. I work in the prisons full time, and we don't use Zoom in the prisons. We just talk to people face to face. So I've missed the whole Zoom phenomena. I've been in the prison so long that this is like something I do twice a year, and I'm very rough at with it. So please excuse my awkwardness and lack of interesting background, because normally I'm just talking to human beings in a room, a very small room, often with a gun port above us. It's a very different vibe to be in a Zoom call. So yes, my name is Abhaya, and I am a prison chaplain and a Theravadan practitioner, have been for many decades. And the text that we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to be talking about today, is one called The Prison of Life, which is a fairly well-known talk given by Ajahn Buddhadasa, or Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, who was a Thai monk of the 20th century, one of the most well-renowned and impactful monks of the 20th century in Thailand. This is a teaching that is not necessarily known worldwide in the Theravadan Buddhist world as something important, but it is a teaching that, as I revisit it year after year, I find a huge amount of depth and challenge to it as a Dharma talk or Dharma teaching, because it, I think, offers a very unusual perspective, not what is the kind of perspective you get with normal, common Dharma talks. And because I work in the prisons, I think that for me, I take a very specific perspective on this talk. So I'm going to be trying to combine a little bit of my prison background with my Dharma practice and Dharma understanding. And I really do like to have open dialogue. So what I want to first encourage is that if you feel like you want to chime in about something, please just toggle your little hand raise button, and or even just unmute yourself and chime in. If I feel like what you bring up is going to take me far afield, I might postpone answering it, but I do like to get live feedback. And I like people to have a chance to talk. Just monologuing for me is not as enjoyable and alive a teaching experience as having dialogue. So I do really encourage you to feel free to engage with me. And that would include if I'm speaking too quickly or using specialist language that you don't understand. Please let me know that. I want to make sure that everything I'm offering is accessible. Okay, so about myself really quick. I'm an American transplant to Canada. I live in a cabin in the woods of BC. I've lived up here about 30 years. I've been Buddhist for many, many decades, like I said, since 97. And I'm ordained as a Dharmacharya, which means I'm sort of an ordained lay teacher. It's a hybrid role that tries to span the distance between monastic and lay. I've also got a master's in Buddhist studies And my background is as a doing somatic trauma therapy and prison chaplaincy. So almost all of my Dharma work has been with highly marginalized, highly traumatized communities. And that's the kind of work I've been doing for 25 years. And that might be all I can think of to say about myself. Uh, there's enough people here. I don't think we can go around and do names right away, but I love to see everyone who's present. And does anyone know this text? That'll be my last question. Does anyone know Buddhadasa Bhikkhu or this text at all? Okay, okay. So you won't be able to read text. I mean, I guess we could read it out loud, but that's not my plan. My plan isn't to read the text out loud. Today, I'll go over a bit of a summary of the text and talk about what it contains. And then I've got a handout, and you'll see that in your chat. Laura was good enough to put that up first thing. You can download that at any time. It's a simple PDF, not very fancy, that gives you some guidelines and some sort of a cheat sheet for the next week. And that's where I feel like the meat of this offering is in the reflection over the next week. Like I said, the talk is a very deep talk. It's worth reviewing over the years in my experience. But I find that it's not always an accessible talk for how do I apply this to real life. So I've created this reflection sheet as a guideline that everyone can use over the next week and on to the future to be able to take the contents of the talk and work with them personally. And then next week, when we meet again, if you've had a chance to read the whole talk, great. We can talk about that, but we'll also talk about and share how the reflection through the week worked for you, whether you found it useful, whether it gave you new insight into anything. And so having that up would be really good after the meditation, just as we're talking about things to be able to reference it. If you want to also have the text referenceable, I know that the link for Buddhadasa's Prison of Life was in the original post about this talk, and maybe Laura, if you've got a minute, you could put up that URL, and then people could also link to it. It's a short PDF, and if you feel like you want to have it around, that could be useful. Is that possible? Yeah, great. How do you all feel about jumping into meditation? Does that feel like yeah, something to do? Great. Um, Now I'll be offering some guidance in the meditation today. I think that it's an honor that I can give to Buddhadasa to offer guidance in Anapanasati. As a Dharma practitioner and teacher, Buddhadasa Bhikkhu almost solely focused on Anapanasati meditation. This is meditation of awareness of breath. And in the Pali Suttas, which are the oldest strata of Buddhist texts, so in the language of Pali, which was more or less the language that we believe the Gautama Buddha spoke originally. He spoke a Prakrit, a variation of Pali. Uh, you find only a couple meditation teachings, and the Anapanasati, which is the sati mindfulness of anapana, the breath coming and going. The Anapanasati Sutta is the oldest of the teachings on meditation chronologically that we have as Buddhists. So it's sort of, I can't say it's the original, that would be a big presumption, but it's an ancient form of meditation. And so I'll be guiding through that lens of doing some breath awareness in honor of Buddhadasa. But if you have a different practice and you'd rather not follow along, that's fine with me. You're welcome to do whatever works for you best when you are in your meditation. Please make yourself comfortable. Make sure that you feel ready. You can keep your cameras on, but I know most people will want to turn them off. And as you get ready, you'll see that I rub my face and hands. This is an old practice I have of somatic triggering. Every time I meditate, I start this way. And so in the long run, I hope and believe that it helps me transition over to have a single physical action I do at the beginning and end of every meditation as a cue to tell my mind, hey, we're about to meditate. Get ready to do that. So I've been doing this for many, many years based on something a teacher told me years ago. But however you get ready, please settle yourself, find a comfortable position, take a few deep breaths, and feel into your experience. How are you this morning? How does it feel in your body to sit here? What kind of sounds do you hear? What does the room smell like? When focusing on breathing, there can be a kind of a concept of breathing that we might hold in our mind. But where the vibrant connection with life is in the embodied experiential breath. So I like to think of an embodied breath as being a breath that your consciousness dives into, like your body can dive into a swimming pool. You can sit on the edge of the pool and see the water move. You can stand cognitively as outside your body and breath and witness your breath. Or you can dive into the pool. You can dive into your body. When you dive into your body, the awareness you have is existing inside the physical experience. So the feeling of breath is all around the awareness, like the awareness is swimming in the body. This may not be an image that right away means something to you, but I do want to keep inviting you to be inside your skin, inside your muscles and bones and organs, to reduce the distance between your sense of presence, the location that you feel awareness occupies, to bring that into the flesh of this body so that you feel the mass and weight of yourself as you sit or lie down. And you feel that mass as pressure, places of pressure along the surface of the body that press into muscles and skin. So it's almost as if your awareness is feeling through your limbs, your flesh to find the heavy pressure feelings. And in contact with those feelings, you let yourself settle. Feel that you're giving over the weight of your body to the firm support of the earth that comes up through the building and the furniture beneath you. When the mind feels steady contact, we're on one end of a kind of continuum of pressure. You can also feel along other parts of your body, other parts of your skin, the open, spacious contact of the atmosphere, of the air in the room, which carries virtually no weight. And if you follow along the surface of your skin, you'll eventually come to your breathing, where the air that touches your body actually is being pulled into your body. And if you stay there at your nostrils, you'll feel the exchange of air, breath to the air in the room, air in the room into your lungs and breath. As you're breathing in and out, notice the free-flowing air. There are no doorways in the body that separate the air inside your lungs from the air in the room around you. And although there are ceiling and walls around you, there are small spaces of continuity between the air in the room and the sky outside. So in a way, the sky itself has extended into your own body. And all around your body is also the air that is also the sky. And in that spacious freedom, your body can expand in every direction as you breathe in. Backwards, out to the sides, to the front, upwards and downwards. Opening up to this feeling of spaciousness and the freedom it offers. Imagine that you're breathing not just through your nose and mouth, but through the pores of your skin. And then follow along through your body to again find the places of solid, firm connection where the mass of your body presses against the chair or floor. Let your breath pause or let go of it as your main focus, and instead focus a little more on stability, the firmness, the contact of pressure. And let this start to transition your focus from the sea of swinging breath back into something a little more fixed and solid, the physical presence of your body. The context of this meditation, sitting here with intention and purpose. You can start to guide yourself towards letting go of the meditation, moving your feet or your hands, letting the breath go as an object of focus. Let your eyes open. And then I always teach my folks that we bow to each other in respect and honor and gratitude after we meditate together. So if you wish, you can join me, Gasho. Thank you. I'm sorry that my computer spaced out there for a second in my meditation. I don't know where it left you, but I trust that you just continued on with awareness. I'm just going to take one tech second to make sure that the problem is not going to occur. I'm a little bit concerned that my power uh, situation, that there's something wrong with my power cable. So if you all don't mind, I'm just going to take 1 second to fiddle with all of my. For some reason, what's happening is I'm not able to get any electricity into my computer. And I think my power has died. So I'm going to need to log on my phone. So I'm going to have to log off here and log on my phone, which can get power, and pick up. So if you'll just give me 1 second. Sorry for this. I will try to not make this too much of a millennial wiggle and just hold my phone still. Okay. Um, so now we're going to go on to the text. And I'm just checking there. Now I can see everyone. So I'm not going to be able to see on my phone. I can't see everyone at the same time. So I think if you do have something to say, I'm not going to be able to see your hand, but maybe Laura still can
Yeah.
and can. Yeah. Okay, great. Um, so Buddhadasa's text is called The Prison of Life. I don't know if you consider that to be a very predictable title for a Dharma text. I find prison is a metaphor that you will find in Buddhism not infrequently. Freedom certainly is a word and a concept that we have deeply associated with awakening. Awakening brings us into great freedom. And prison stands in very stark contrast to freedom. Prison is not a concept that has always existed in the same way it does now. Prison's a very modern creation. There have been types of imprisonment throughout history, I'm sure, but I won't say that the kind of prison setting we have now is been known by all peoples in any way. But it makes sense that we talk about prison. And often the prison we talk about is the prison of negative experiences or negative karmas. But in this text, Buddhadasa is talking about a very different set of circumstances as prisons than we would normally see. He starts off by discussing that life is a prison. And then he goes on from there, highlighting instincts and because my computer's died, I'm doing this all from memory because that's where the document I have is. He talks about instincts. He talks about sacred things as well. He goes on to discuss teachers, holy objects, institutions, and then he finishes with goodness and purity. So, what is standing a little bit different about this list from other lists is that it includes a lot of positive things. Okay, I pulled my list up. We've got life is a prison, instincts are a prison, your senses are a prison, superstition is a prison, sacred institutions, teachers, holy things, goodness, views, and purity. So this is a bit of an intense list because it is really big concepts, several different types of concepts, and some of them may not be very intuitive. Like, why would goodness or purity be a prison, right? When I started studying this text, what really stood out for me is that there were ways to use what he was writing to analyze experientially what he meant by prison. And so that is what I'll be talking about today is if we take the working assumption that what Buddhadasa is offering us as wise and useful information is not just wise and useful, but actionable information, that we can take these words and do something with them in our personal practice and derive benefit from that, then how should we understand it and how should we relate to it? And this is a very, I think, common Theravadan approach, very pragmatic. I hope it exists in all forms of Buddhism, a real level of pragmatism, that these are not concepts that we dwell in as mental heavens. These are very down-to-earth ideas that we want to engage with directly. Now, it's tough when we're talking about prison, I think, because most people don't have experience with prison, and so they think about prison in a very symbolic way, in a very one-dimensional way. And what I mean by that is that prison is a kind of a black box, like literal prison is a kind of a black box. You can't see what goes on behind the walls. There's very hidden experience there. And that serves everyone in a way because it allows us to imagine that all the bad people go into a dark place go into a place far from our vision and far from influencing us. And they're kept safe there. And whatever happens there, we can just sort of let it be someone else's problem. If you think about that dynamic from a human psychology perspective, you could compare this to the Jungian shadow. I don't know that everyone's familiar with this, so I'll explain what I understand about it, knowing that some of you may be like Jungian therapists who know a lot more than me. But what I understand about the Jungian concept, Jung was a psychologist of the 20th century, and this concept he had, which he called the shadow, was that in a human, there are parts of our personalities that we hold up as very valuable and respect worthy, and we want to see them grow. And as we do that, as we pull ourselves sort of into pieces and take some of those pieces and put them up as high status and admirable, because they are separated out from us, they sort of cast a shadow. And the shadow is the part of us that is the opposite of that piece that we're holding up in such high esteem. So if we hold up our kindness in very high esteem and we really strive to be kind, then we throw a shadow on our cruelty. And by being in shadow, we hide our cruelty from ourselves. By shining all of the light of our attention on our kindness, we can put our cruelty into the shadow and hide the shadow of, hide the cruelty from ourselves. And so there's a process there, and this is just still finishing up about Jungian psychology, where people are encouraged to reclaim their shadow and do what's called shadow work, which is to look at the parts of yourself that you deny exist, reject, and want to decrease their existence, and sort of reclaim them and bring them up into the light as well. Now, I bring up the Jungian shadow work because I think it parallels prison, but the kind of work I'm going to propose we do inspired by this piece is a little bit different. And it's a little bit the same. Prisons are structures that have very specific components. There is, first of all, has to be a crime. There has to be some quality of guilt and innocence, some quality of having done a moral wrong. And that, in contrast, there could have been other options, a moral right. And that with this culpability, there comes a necessary confinement and reduction of freedom. And Buddhadasa mentions this right away in the text. He brings up very quickly in the text that wherever you see restriction and confinement based on freedom being a dangerous thing, there you find a prison. So what I'm saying here about prisons is not just my understanding from my work, but it's in the text. So I'm hopefully working along with Buddhadasa here, that where we see certain things, we can identify there is a prison, there is imprisonment, there is imprisonment. So if you start to, so what I propose is that we look at some of the factors on the list that Buddhadasa gives us to look at how they might be factors that have imprisonment in them. I think instincts is a very good place to start. Instincts is the second prison that Buddhadasa identifies. And what he describes as an instinct is not very well articulated, but I'm just going to give you a definition of instinct, that it's an innate, unlearned behavior that living beings exhibit. So innate and unlearned means instincts don't come from our socialization. Instincts come from within our bodies, within our living being. They're inborn. Innate is inborn. And that these instincts that live in us, that came with us into this life, are exhibited in response to specific stimuli or internal drives. So, like a very clear instinct would be the instinct towards, say, sexual instinct, desire. There is a very strong instinct in most people at some point in their life towards sexual activity. The body wants it. We go through puberty, lots of energy. How could that be a prison? We can think about that in different ways, and that the prison of your instincts is that your desires overwhelm your mind. We could think about the prison of sexual desire is that it reduces the freedom you have to make choices because the power of it influences your mind. But I want to propose a different way of thinking it, that it's not that the instincts are the prison because they control us alone, but that there's an aspect of having instincts that requires us to self inhibit. We become aware of the power of sexuality at different points in our lives, but I think that once you understand it, you realize, ooh, not the most trustworthy guide in my life. I'm going to have to inhibit a little bit. I'm not going to be able to let my sexual instincts or other instincts, my instincts towards violence or instincts of trying to say, eat things that are very sweet and fatty, because that's something that the body sort of craves. That these instincts, I can't let them drive the car of my life. I'm going to have to put them to the side. I'm going to have to disempower them or disconnect them from my choice making. And that is not a wrong thing to do. But there is a quality of that struggle of self management that can become self imprisonment, that can become being your own imprisoner. And what I want to say is the part of this that's worth all the questioning is we can use the power we have in our life in many, many different ways. And the easiest way to control is through domination. So, one of the first ways of using our own power on ourselves that we develop is that we dominate. Domination would be an intentional use of strength to force something to stop or to force something to do differently than it would flow on its own. This makes a lot of sense. If you are in a situation where you're feeling sexual desire for someone who you should not be feeling sexual desire for, at least shouldn't act on sexual desire, you will want to inhibit. You will want to suppress and push down, especially if it's a situation with complexity. It's your boss and you're in a meeting. It's you're meeting, your best friend's new husband or partner or something. There are times where we don't even want to know we feel that stuff. Suppression is a form of dominance. Moral judgment can be a form of dominance. And these are stemming from this sort of drive we might have to control ourselves through dominance, often becomes partnered with a sense of moralism. Does that seem obvious to everyone? I want to make sure I'm not just making broad, sweeping truth claims that anybody takes issue with. That that we can use our power in ways that is dominating, really connects to and can be strengthened by moralism. Now, moralism here, what I mean by that is wanting to judge things as right or wrong, having a sense of a bar or a standard, and that things that are above that standard can be allowed to continue, and things that are below that standard must be somehow rejected. So it's a sense of good enough, a sense of allowable. This may not be like a philosophically accurate definition of moralism, but this is how I'm meaning to use it right now. Humans have instincts. Instincts are very powerful. Some aspects of those instincts are not wise, not skillful to act upon. We need to control ourselves so we dominate, and we end up moralizing about that aspect of our instincts. And I think that this is the kind of, this is just my opinion, not Dharma. This is the kind of sort of moral story that you can see all through the culture that I grew up in, that socially appropriate things are morally good, and that socially appropriate things are more important than what feelings arise in my body. And so I should act on socially appropriate things, and those are morally good. So if my instincts drive me to do other things, those are morally bad. So it's okay to dominate them because they are in some way dangerous. And that is a kind of imprisonment of life. Now, this is not a concept that I see in all areas of Buddhism or all parts of Buddhism, but you see it in Zen, you see it definitely in some Tibetan teachings, an idea that life has a certain flow to it, that the vitality of existence coursing through a human being carries with it a flow. And in Zen, the Zen I studied, I learned especially that the freedom a Buddhist is working on is a freedom of being able to act spontaneously and have your spontaneous actions be skillful. And so I guess that right there is the doorway out of these prisons that I'm talking about. Skillfully spontaneous action rather than skillfully controlled action. Now, this is just one example. So, again, we're talking about instincts, and I'm trying to discuss how the way we manage ourselves as human beings involves a certain kind of dominance, control, and restriction that we end up feeling is good for everyone, but is in and of itself got a karma of inhibiting life's flow or reducing life's flow. Can everyone follow me there? Little twinkle of the fingers if you're following me. Yeah, okay, great. Thanks. I'll go on to another one and see how well my suppositions fit. So another type of prison he describes would be teachers. Let's look at teachers. So what would be an example of teachers as prison? Well, so there are going to be people who know more than we do, and there will be things that they know that we find attractive and interesting. There will also be people who know more than we do about things that we find unattractive and ugly. Yet they're all teachers. This is a common Buddhist teaching. Approach all beings as your teachers. And yet, if we think about it, there's a lot of people that we may be able to speak about them as teachers, but we would not study what they are offering because the lessons they're offering, whether they're lessons of unskillfulness or lessons delivered without skill, or even just lessons we don't understand, that we might reject them or devalue them. And in rejecting and devaluing them, we might find ourselves restricting our mind and curiosity from really engaging with what they have to offer us. So I'm going to give an example of the teachers I see in prison every day. The teachers I see in prison every day are the inmates and the staff. And for the most part, the most obvious lessons I see every day are things not to do. That is a really common thing I see at work is ways not to act, interpretations not to buy into, value systems not to believe in without question. It is not a place where skillfulness, as I understand it as a Dhamma practitioner, are on display regularly and obviously. But I see also people just clearly having human experiences I can totally relate to. I know what pain feels like. Lots of people are in pain. I know what frustration feels like. Lots of people are frustrated. On and on and on. But in the process of learning from everybody in such an uncomfortable situation, it's very easy to do a couple things. One is to take a kind of moral high ground about others do this and I do not do this. I listen and act, so you listen and act so unskillfully where I am doing something more skillful. And very quickly, I can create a kind of a shadow there where all the ways that I act exactly like the most difficult and manipulative person in the prison, I just deny because I'm so turned off by what I see them doing. I couldn't possibly parallel that in my own heart. Mm-mm. I can also sort of have a kind of sense of others as teacher where the teaching that's happening is I take everything everyone does as object lessons of what not to do, and I understand no further what motivates them or the complex net of reactivity that constrains everybody from clearly seeing and acting. And that comes with a kind of moralism again, where I'm just like, there's no value here because it's so ugly, it's so painful, it's so stupid. There's no value here. There's nothing for me to study. And perhaps because this is where I came into prisons, I came in from, even though I have a lot of work experience with marginalized communities and have my own trauma history, I didn't come from a background with violence and prison as part of it. And so when I started working in prisons, I really could not see what was there in a helpful way as teachers. But over the years of bringing as much mindfulness as I could figure out to bring to every event that I experienced, I came to realize how much I had failed to learn in my life because I had not been exposed to such ugly things. And I had not tried to understand and perceive clearly the roots of phenomena of violence, dominance, manipulation, reactivity. And so, in doing that, I had a huge, in coming to terms with what prison has taught me people are like. Not saying that people are like themselves better in prison than outside, but just that there's a whole bunch of ways people behave in prison I never saw outside prison. I have come to realize, oh, something about being a human, something about being uh, in samsara that I don't know I would have ever lived with or experienced outside of prison. Because it's all so uncomfortable. It's all so uncomfortable. I'm being a little open here. I'm not trying to make too many rigid like structures where one thing leads to the next, but what I'm trying to draw out is some creative thinking about an idea that there are four things that you can look for. And this brings me to the document I've sent out to everyone. We're on the first page, there's a little table. And the table I have labeled conditions and signs of a prison. And the four conditions are that there's some strong sense of right and wrong, and there's some strong idea about guilt or innocence, that there's some sense of needed growth and pain or lack of freedom being necessary for the growth, that you're going to need to learn through being punished. and that there's some kind of judgment person whose job it is, or if it's just one person, some part of me whose job it is to decide when I'm safe to be released. So those four qualities, Buddhadasa highlights them right in the second page, I think, of the document, where he says, wherever the conditions and signs of a prison exist, right there is dukkha. Being captured, incarcerated, and chained and put through difficulties and hassles are all characteristics of dukkha. And what for me this means is that we can use these four areas, looking for right and wrong, looking for examples of where we're judging guilt and innocence, seeing where there's a feeling that I'm insufficient in my understanding and that the way to sufficiency is through hurting somehow or punishment somehow, and that there's some part of me that can judge when I'm ready to be free again. That those four qualities can be used to look for the marks of a very subtle kind of clinging, a prison made of a very subtle clinging. And so the two examples I've given so far of instincts and how we suppress our instincts to not behave badly, and the other example of teachers and how some people, when we call them teachers, we treat them like teachers, and some people, when we call them teachers, we're like, no, you're just a bad example for me to look at for 30 seconds and then never emulate again. That these are both places where we can start to inquire about these four factors and whether they're present or absent. I'm going to take one more example. So we have worked with the three areas of the list. Uh, Goodness. Goodness is the second to last category of prison that Buddhadasa highlights. He says, to be searching for goodness, striving for goodness is a kind of a prison. And I'm going to guess if for most people who have been practitioners for a good while, this is something you've run into in your mind and your experience. This is something that you've seen, that at some point you have become aware that you have trapped yourself in a trap of, I can't do this because I'm a good person and good people don't do this. Maybe not, but I feel like that's something that we can see in ourselves generally. I mean, obviously, in the topic of goodness, the first issue of right and wrong is so easy to find. It's so obvious. But even the fourth quality of imprisonment, where there is the parole officer, the part of you that's trying to judge whether you will be allowed more freedom or not, that can be a huge part of relating to a desire for goodness. Let's say you're on a exercise regime and you get invited to go out for desserts with a friend when you're supposed to be exercising, and there's a little part of you that's trying to assess whether you are going to allow yourself to do that or not, whether you deserve it or not, whether your behavior has been good enough up to now for you to be free to act on that. That's for many people, a large part of how they're relating to the concept of goodness in their life is they are watching themselves like a parole officer, trying to figure out if they deserve a break and they should be allowed. And then there's another part of us that's the incarcerated part that's always like, I should be allowed. I should be allowed. Anyhow, the the whole purpose of this talk for me is that I know the power of Dhamma when really I'm able to put all of my intelligence and sensitivity and creativity into play in pursuing living the Dhamma and a fully embodied present expression of what Dhamma teaches, that's where the transformational part of this practice is. And what I think, based on my own life and being a teacher for many decades, is that a lot of us don't get enough opportunities to do that. We get Dharma talks to work with, but we don't necessarily get Dharma workbooks to work with. We get ideas to think about, but we don't always get playgrounds or creative spaces to explore. And I wanted to try to take this one talk by Buddhadasa and use it to create a kind of reflective strategy for us to experiment with. And I'm going to pause for a second before I jump in, because that's sort of the first part of my topic. Trying to explain to those who haven't yet read the text a little bit about how I'm approaching the text, which is a hard way to start. Is anything standing out? Anybody want to ask anything, say anything, share anything? Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm listening. And so I think it's really interesting that you're giving this talk as a Theravada teacher to a Tibetan Sangha, because, and many of, I can't speak for everybody here, but a lot of people come to NDF having had some kind of Theravada background. I did. I was in an insight community before I came here. And it sounds kind of like a Theravada, a non-dual like Theravada teaching. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, it does make
really
sense.
constructing the tradition from inside the tradition. Is that
Hmm.
fair?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. That's what's coming up for me. Yeah.
And is that satisfying an itch or seem really incongruous or
No,
anything
no, it
more?
makes a whole lot of sense, and it's really interesting because when I arrived at this tradition about 10 years ago, I had
Yeah.
done a lot of Theravada practice and I was experiencing rigidity. So then when I arrived to these teachings, it
Mm,
was freeing.
mm,
And then at the same time, it was disorienting because it was like, how do you not focus on anything? But what's
mm,
interesting is in the context of practice, it's like all unsettling. If I'm doing a lot of open awareness meditation, then when I'm doing focusing on the breath, I go back. It's like
mm,
both direction, either direction is unsettling. It's like if I get practiced in one, then the other feels unsettling.
mm,
My point being that like coming from there to here felt like an opening. And it's interesting that you're finding the opening from where I felt like I was coming from. I know I'm
mm.
meandering, but like,
No, that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
I really appreciate that sharing. Thank you, Laura, because I feel like yeah, I think that is actually what I wouldn't have said that's what I'm doing, but clearly that's what I'm doing. And I've always been a very iconoclastic Theravadan. I'm like a Theravadan who's got a huge chip on her shoulder that's like, don't tell me what to do, and I can figure this out for myself. And so I've really been an outsider practitioner for a lot of years. And for me, the main focus has been I'm not going to assume that I'm going to get my best information from teachers. I'm going to assume I get my best information from the suttas. So I'm a very strongly focused academic scholar on the Pali Suttas. So I study the Pali Suttas, and pretty much that's all I study, except for when I find a book with a really good topic. But I don't look at a lot of modern teachings too much. And that was for me part of why I did the academic work, was so that I felt I could be empowered to study this stuff directly and not need an intercessory teacher between me and the Dharma, that I could just study it directly. But also because I've worked in such fringe areas, fringe here meaning not mainstream Buddhism, but like I'm off in the prisons, or I'm working in the downtown east side of Vancouver with street entrenched and drug users, that there's so much about Dharma talks that's just so Theravadan, at least, it's so pleasant and nice and polite and really, the advice and the direction is filled with depth, but it's delivered, and I think the community sort of hold it in what I call chronic niceness. Like this is like peak niceness, and niceness is where we're headed. And this talk by Buddhadasa for me is a incredibly powerful talk because he's undermining so much. Like Buddhadasa was known in Thailand as a radical. I'll just give you a few bits of information about him. He was born of just sort of a normal family. His father was a merchant. But when he became a monk and started to learn to meditate, he absolutely felt called to it. So he took up robes as a teenager, and he decided to go to Bangkok to study in the Buddhist universities, and was very quickly disillusioned. He felt that the monks there were corrupt and superficial and relying mostly on superstition. And so he studied academically, but he never finished any schooling officially. He instead learned enough Pali to be able to read the suttas for himself, and he went back to his area near the village and started Sonmok, which was his wat, his temple. And he spent his lifetime deeply focused on studying the Pali Suttas at a time when the Theravadan Buddhist community was mostly interested in third degree commentaries. So commentaries on commentaries on commentaries. And in doing that, he created a very radical reform movement to reduce corruption in the Buddhist monastic community and to improve this training and of monastics to be much closer to what the Buddha's teachings outlined. He was also a radical political reformer, and he posited a form of Buddhist socialism as the only Buddhist governmental structure that made any sense, that there should be a restructuring of wealth in society where those who have more support those who have less, and that should be guided through wise government officials. And although he is Thai, he was not connected with Ajahn Chah and that lineage at all of the Thai forest tradition. He worked on understanding meditation directly through his own experience. And he was known by the Dalai Lama, known by Ajahn Chah, and highly respected by them. But at the same time, he was sort of a non-famous outsider who ended up teaching a lot of Westerners in Thailand in that last half of the 20th century. He would be, though, in Thailand, considered one of the great teachers of the 20th century. And at the same time, he always stood apart from and confronted and pushed for reform in Buddhism. So it doesn't surprise me that he would give a teaching like this that's so radical, because in it he's saying, the way that people are superstitious is a prison. The way that people deal with the Sangha is a prison. The way that people look at their teachers is a prison. The way that people relate to all their holy objects, their amulets, their mantras, both physical and immaterial holy objects, is a prison. Their desire for goodness, their desire for purity, all of these are prisons. He's directly confronting in this teaching what I guess we might call spiritual materialism, but he's doing it at an even deeper level. He's doing it at the level of uh, inviting us to perceive something and giving us just enough information that we can start on a project of dismantling our prisons, but without really making it very explicit. Yeah. Anybody else want to say anything about what I've said so far? What's come up?
Justine, I see your hand. Is that intentional? Yeah. Okay. You should be able to unmute. Let me make sure. Oh, no. Okay. My apologies. Now you should be able to unmute.
Okay, yeah, there we go. Thanks. Um, uh, so I just wanted to say that, so even though I've been a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner for a while, I still go to insight meditation centers like a couple times a year because I find, like what Laura was saying, that it freshens the flow of my
Mhm.
practice.
Mm, mm,
And but I find everything you're saying about life as a prison is actually, at least because I'm a student of literature and philosophy, like it actually really aligns with my experience of our sort of foundational texts, like Plato in the Cave or
mm, mm,
Shakespeare or, even Virginia Woolf. Like she does these psychological studies of people who are they're in the prison of their own perceptions.
mm,
They are so clinging so tightly to
mm,
what they think of as, you know, because in England, you have the class system and all that, these things that are society deems
mhm, mm,
morally good and that are seen as valuable, therefore, but actually they don't have any inherent value,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
Right. So uh thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity to explore this text, which I hadn't heard of. So thank you. Yeah.
Oh, no, thank you, Justine. Thank you. I appreciate that. I hadn't thought about it in that direction, but absolutely, this is something we know in many parts of society. Anybody else? Oh, yeah, I see some more.
Susan, you want to go ahead?
Hi. I found this text. I did read it last night. I couldn't stop reading it, even though it was super late. I just kind of hadn't checked things out for Dharma Sunday. I found it really wonderful and really hit a lot of points for me in my own Dharma studies since the 70s and uh, several years living at the Insight Meditation Society, which is Theravadan, and on staff and as a yogi. Um, and then I was also thinking about two things. One is that what he's saying in a way kind of talks a bit like the tantric tradition where the ceremonial things that are considered gross, or wine or bodily fluids or sex or
Mhm,
whatever are seen as things that are not gross in sex,
mm,
like not having that distinction, of,
mhm,
you know, and so it sounded very tantric in that way.
mhm, mhm,
Um, but I also think the Theravadan, I kind of moved into the Tibetan because they didn't really acknowledge the energy body,
mm,
or the fact that after a while you start with the physical body, but then the energy body manifests, and then what do you do with it? And there were
mhm,
no teachings about that, and that's what kept happening to me.
mm,
And then I heard a German monk there who was just there temporarily, and he was reading something from the original teachings of the Buddha, where it said the breath within the breath, and he didn't have any idea what that meant,
mhm,
the prana or the chi or the life force. And the way he was like just saying things about it, it was like, oh, they don't even acknowledge energy,
mm, mm,
And of course, if you're a person who tends to have those experiences, you don't really fit in. The teachings
mm,
teachers don't really teach in that manner. And so even though I love aspects of the Theravada and I still honor them, I learned so much. I felt like an outsider
mm,
somehow. Like it didn't fit me,
mhm,
which is what moved me towards the Tibetan. But then in the Tibetan stuff, I also found a lot of teachers were harming people through, sexual abuse and stuff. And then that was a real issue because I had that kind of history in my childhood. And then I heard a lecture from a Tibetan teacher. He wasn't from Tibet, but he decided he couldn't be a monk anymore. And he was talking about all kinds of stuff that he saw from the insider point of view in terms of sexual abuse of children within monasteries in Sri Lanka. And that just blew me apart. And then I thought that putting people on a pedestal never ends well, right?
Yeah.
And there's so much devotional stuff that we're taught in Buddhism. You know, the teacher is the guru, or the teacher is the Buddha, or whatever. And that's a setup for their abuse in a way, because then they have all these adoring people who believe anything they say, you know? So I can see like how this perpetuates, you know, the harm, you know? And I don't know, I just go through all kinds of torturous ways of trying to figure it all out, you know? And it's just a real important thing for us all to chew on, you know? And I'm really glad you're doing this because I mean, I still don't have any answers, you know, but I do. And then I live next to a felon who did some horrible stuff, you know, who's also a manipulator and he's always trying to get stuff out of people. And that's, yeah, he's my teacher. I keep saying he's my teacher, but I really don't like living next to him. I'm stuck with him, you know? So, like, there are different levels of processing things, you know? Try to open my heart to him because I know what his childhood was like and, you know, all that stuff. But he's still a master manipulator, you know? And he got bailed out by his brother who paid restitution, or he'd still be in jail right now. So it's really hard to deal with all these levels of my mind, my beliefs, and this this really is important stuff. This is really important stuff. I'm so grateful you're doing this. So anything you could say that would be of use would be grateful.
I appreciate your openness, Susan. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear people talk about going from Theravada to Tibetan. I went the other way. I started Tibetan and then I went to Zen and then I ended up in Theravada and that's where I've stayed. But I think that that journey we may not have time to talk about too much more for people because I see we have a half an hour. I do want to get to everyone's hands, but I think rather than sort of comparing the two, or is there anything about what I've been talking about that other people, Anne Marie or Natalie, that you wanted to share or respond to or ask about?
I appreciated what you said about the workbook because I've always wanted that. And I thought that would be an answer for me to understand myself and the other people. But for me, I've come to realize I kind of grasp at that, and it could become easily a prison for myself all over again. That this idea of being in the moment and being open and receptive to whatever is going on, for me, is perhaps a better working model. But still, I long for that textbook thing, you know, work at this, understand this. So there could be a relative truth there and an absolute truth there. I'm not sure at this juncture. But thank you for bringing up the idea of a workbook because I would love to have one. And yet at the same time, I'm not sure that's that great. I remember doing a course in miracles, and there was a little workbook with that and some other things you could do. And it helped open things up, but it also raised a lot of questions for me. It's a skill I have to work on myself and develop for myself and be aware that there's going to be confusion and rejection and being in an uncomfortable place that I don't like to be.
Can I ask you a little bit about what you just said, Natalie?
Sure.
So when you talk about that, the workbook, you're drawn to it, but I'm sensing, I'm understanding that there's aspects of it that you find make you more, are you saying that actually doing sort of structured reflection creates confusion? Am I hearing you right in that?
Has potential to do
Has
that.
potential to do that, yeah.
I wonder if it's from my meditation, if I don't go deep enough, or if it's just from my lack of self-compassion and compassion for others. Something that I keep playing with my
Mm.
mind and accepting this is where I'm at in this time and in this place. And perhaps it is an area that I need to grow in. I don't necessarily have an answer for that other than stay open to the moment.
Yeah, and I appreciate you being open about that now. Thank you. I'm going to touch on that in a few minutes, so I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Looks like there's one more person.
Hi, thank you for introducing us to Buddhadasa, particularly his poetry. I got a chance to read. Maybe we don't have time for this, but I was curious, working in the prisons, you're dealing with people who may have been victims of sexual abuse and then perpetuated it, victims of violent, and then perpetuating it. So this, from a Buddhist perspective of dependent arising, when there's a Buddhadasa teaching and the self-assessment, kind of how deep do you go? Where do you start? Where do you end? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I'll just answer that from my own perspective very quickly, and I'll probably sound very dramatic. There is a teaching in Theravada where the Buddha says that there is only one human experience powerful enough to carry a person all the way to full awakening. And it is in an incredibly painful felt experience where you understand dukkha and samsara so deeply that your heart quivers in pain from the futile, hope-filled, unskillful actions of all human beings trying to meet their needs in the wrong ways because they don't fully understand the world. And so they're just trapping themselves deeper in the very thing they're trying to solve. And for me, that feeling was engendered when I fully understood the amount of pain that I'll say most of the harm doers I know in prison, the prisoners I know, the amount of pain they caused parallels the amount of pain they experienced, and the amount of pain that they're in is reflected in the amount of pain the staff is in, and the amount of pain the staff is in is reflected in the amount of pain the inmates are in because they're reacting. And I started to see that we're just all over our heads. We're just underwater in dukkha. Dukkha is, and samsara is everywhere in people's minds and behaviors. And I don't think I would have been strong enough to fully experience that as I did if I had not have spent 15 plus years before that realization working first on the streets and then in the prisons and just becoming calloused. That's an interesting word, calloused, because it's a real thing that happens when you're exposed to a lot of pain. The sensitivity maybe dulled because you are, the first time you're surprised or shocked, it's a big feeling, but the 400th time you barely register it because your nervous system just gets used to that being part of your regular experience. And for me, the pain and suffering of everybody in the criminal justice system, I've been soaking in it for a long time, and I think helped me move from a conceptual idea of what is dukkha and samsara to a much more breathing, vital experience of, oh my God, we are suffering. Oh, the suffering. Oh, the unskillful activity. Oh, look at me go, more unskillful activity. So, I don't know how it is for anyone else, but all I can say is that the Buddha teaches in the Pali Suttas that we must become fascinated by dukkha, experts in dukkha. We must totally be able to appreciate and understand every aspect of its arising and cessation, all of its influences and connected associated, activities. And that is sort of like telling someone, if you really want good digestion, excuse my language here, you're going to need to become an expert in shit. You're going to need to know what it smells like and looks like and even tastes like. You're going to need to be able to look at it and study it with no sense of disgust. If you really want healthy digestion, you have to look at the worst part of it with as much curiosity and interest as you look at the solution. And if you only look at the solution with that fascination and interest, you're missing all the clues that are in the effluent. The effluent has so many interesting and important clues about how things are happening poorly. And that's really important. Because how things are happening well, there's very little to learn. There's a great deal of relief and even renewal when things are happening without the kleshas. When the mind is without the kleshas, it's just a delightful place. But when the mind is heavy with the kleshas, that is where all the learning is, because that's where all the patterns that we need to be able to skillfully adjust are seen. We don't see those patterns of needing adjustment in what is already liberated. We don't design prison reform from a place of never being in prison. Prison reform, this is such an interesting thing. Almost all criminology and prison academia in all of history has excluded the voices and experience of prisoners. And I find that super fascinating, because there is now a type of prison criminology called prisoner criminology, or con criminology, where people in prison get their criminology degrees and then become academics while they're doing time, and then they're bringing in actual lived experience into criminological analysis, and it just creates totally different theories and reflections. And I think that is part of how experimenting with Dhamma works, is that our unawakened being is the experimenter and the experimental object. We are working on ourselves and tracking the influence of that work upon ourselves, and then analyzing it all from a state of potential contamination of a mind with kleshas. And that is a very messy and complex experience. So for me, workbooks, I use workbook as a term, but I think what's more valuable than workbooks as something formal is just having a good habit of data collection and data analysis through reflection. So that's sort of what I was going to talk about next. And I think I'll touch on a few things people have said, because this text offers us something really interesting to use. So with your permission, I'm going to go on to the final section of the talk today, which is based on the handout that's in the chat. So I don't know if everyone will have experience with being a naturalist, and a naturalist is someone who goes out and studies nature through direct observation. Bird watchers are naturalists. If you're a gardener, you're quite likely somewhat of a naturalist because you have to do a lot of study when you're gardening. What's eating my plants? What are my plants telling me they need? What's the weather going to require that I do to help my plants? You know, there's lots of different ways we study nature, but how I understand Dhamma is that this is naturalism. The nature we're studying is ourselves and other human beings. Buddhadasa also was very focused on Dhamma as naturalism, and nature for him was the template for all of his Dharma analysis. If you go into his readings, he talks about it a lot. I think this is very well supported by the Pali Suttas. There's quite a bit where the Buddha is talking about, you know, like there's no word for cultivation in Pali, or for meditation. The word we use is cultivation, farming. We're farming ourselves. We're farming our minds. We're cultivating. Farming's not even quite accurate because farming has a bias, implicit bias towards productivity. But cultivation is, you know, something that doesn't aim just for productivity, but for life, for flourishing. So in a naturalist approach to a Dhamma teaching, how I see it is it's like you have your bird book. You have your book of here is the bird you're looking for, here is its habitat, here are its markings, here are its flight patterns, here's what it looks like against the sky and silhouette, here's what it eats, here's what its song sounds like. You get a lot of clues. You get a key list of clues, things to look for that tell you that the animal is likely to be there. And then you sit around and you look for it and you wait, you know? And in my mind, this is a really great way to do Dharma reflection is you get a little sheet from a teaching that's like, here's the thing you're looking for. Here's what its footsteps look like. Here's what its impact looks like. Here's some of the qualities it exhibits. Here's how you can recognize it. And then you just start looking for it until you've seen it a few times and you can start collecting data on it. And then from there, you can look at all the data and try to come up with some conclusions. So this is a pretty scientific method approach. Come up with a plan, collect some information, analyze the information, come up with an idea of something. In the text I sent you, I'm sorry, I'm just pulling that up. I have these 4 qualities that I'm listing, and I pulled them from Buddhadasa saying, wherever the conditions and signs of prison exist, right there is dukkha. I'm going with the assumption that there's a certain kind of dukkha. No, I won't even say that. A certain kind of activity that we want to see, the imprisoning activity. And we look for the imprisoning activity because there we will find the dukkha. So first we're looking for the imprisoning, the marks of imprisonment, of self-imprisonment or of imprisonment. And then from there we try to derive where's the dukkha. And then from there we have the question of where's the clinging? Because the clinging, the second half of this text, and we'll talk about this much more next week, is upadana, the clinging and craving. And that is what needs to be uprooted and purified for liberation. So where a prison in the world is made of concrete and steel, the prison for a human consciousness is in upadana, in clinging. And where clinging to some phenomena is very obvious and we can work on it very well and very easily and directly with joy, it usually is because the clinging and craving is related to unpleasant things we want to get rid of anyhow. You know, liberation for what we don't like is so easy compared to liberation from what we really like. That's so much harder to do, to not cling to what we really like. And in a metaphor of prison, one of the difficulties of prison is it pulls apart and hides the most painful parts of things. And I am saying, let's take the reality of prison, Buddhadasa's teachings, and turn it into a 1 week naturalist tracking experiment. And what you're going to be looking for are signs of two things. So those qualities of right and wrong, guilt and innocence, growth that requires pain or punishment, and judgment that requires proving that you deserve things. Or the second thing would be, if you are looking at that handout, there is a section 2 down on the same page from the table that says, many of the defining features of incarceration are linked to negative mental health outcomes, including disconnection, loss of autonomy, boredom and lack of purpose, and a sense of unpredictability in your surroundings. So what I'm theorizing is that if what we do with our mind is like prison, and prison has qualities that affect human minds in this way, then our own self-imprisonment must also affect us in that way. So if real life steel and brick prisons lead to mental health issues of feeling disconnected, helpless, bored, meaninglessness, and confusion, then probably prison making in our own mind leads us to the same qualities. Can you follow that? And it's a bit of a mental leap. It's not just pure Dharma here. I'm doing a bit of a logical if A then B, and B then C, then if A then C. If these are prisons for humans and prisons cause these mental health problems, then where we see in ourselves instances of that pain, we must be looking at places we have had long-term dynamics of imprisonment in ourselves. And the biggest thing that prison is a morally defensible use of force to dominate and control. That
Morally
is
defended, not morally defensive.
That's so much better, Heather. Oh my gosh. Thank you. Yes, morally defended. Thank you. Very accurate. Good catch. So that would mean that where we see in ourselves confusion, purposelessness, helplessness, and a sense of dull disconnection from life, we should be able to find places where we have morally defended our use of force to control and inhibit ourselves. And not ourselves as selves, but our lives as flow. We are looking for, how do these painful psychological experiences map to when I've used my own power and felt okay about using my own power potentially to control, inhibit, and restrict myself. Not myself again, but the flow of life in me. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So we're looking for two things. What I'm sort of saying is there's two sets of two pieces, types of information you're looking for. You're the tracker, you're looking for the bird. The bird here is, how do I create a prison for my life? And you're looking either for direct examples of any of these 10 categories. When I talk to someone this week about my life, what are the words I say? What are the topics I pick? What are the feelings I have? What are the images I use? Or when I'm interacting with a teacher, if I go to a Dharma teaching, or if I'm worried about not being good enough, how does that come up? So you're looking for any of the concrete topics that Buddhadasa highlights. Out of those 10, you can pick one for the week to track, or two for the week to track, or you can just look for any of them. You can then, when you see an example of you interacting with that part of life, you can try to capture some details in your mind or on paper about whether you see moralism, judgment, punishment for your own good, or uh, self-evaluation for your own good, like critical self-evaluation for your own good. Those are the first four little table. Or you can look and see confusion, disconnection, or any sense of disempowerment. And just try to keep track of that. Picking one or two of the topics that Buddhadasa highlights, tracking when you engage with them over the next week. Do you see direct imprisonment activity, or do you see the impact of long-term imprisonment in mental qualities? And you just sort of capture it. So this would be like if you were tracking a bird and you see some of the fruit it eats, you're looking to see how ripe it is. If you are listening to someone talk about something in regards to, I don't know, a Dharma teaching, you are looking to see any time good or bad comes up, anytime I don't know, I'm not good enough to understand this yet comes up. And you're just sort of tracking it. I realize this is a little vague, and part of why this is vague is because this is me trying to externalize something I do very internally, and so I don't have hundreds of times I've taught this and a lot of feedback from people about the best way to do it. This is only the third time I've ever taught this, and I am hoping that your commitment and expertise will contribute to helping me understand all this better. But I believe that if we can look at things we normally don't look for dukkha in because we consider them high value things, that we can start to understand a deeper level of clinging that we are carrying in our life than we realize exists. And that these are markers trying to aim us at a deeper level of clinging that's specifically focused on clinging to being a good person, clinging to not being someone who needs to be controlled, clinging to sort of freedom while still having self. So, how am I doing with time? Yeah, we're in the last 3 minutes, or I should probably wrap up. So, what I'll say is that you are all welcome to have my email, to contact me about this worksheet through the week if you've got questions. But if you're intrigued, take the handout, pick a topic, and see if you can, through the lens of imprisonment, identify any patterns in your life that you have not seen before. And then next week, what we'll do is we'll share that and talk about that, and then talk about clinging. I didn't want to get into sort of the answer to the question till we'd done data collection. So next week is when we get into the answer, which is clinging and freedom from clinging. Yeah. Great. I hope that all made sense. Thank you so much for the help, Laura. Is there some closing you need to do or anything else that needs to happen?
No, I mean, would you like to, how do you dedicate? Or do you dedicate
Oh,
your dedication? Do you want to?
I do not have that prayer as a part of my regular practice.
Okay.
So I would appreciate if someone else who does would do that.
Yeah, I can do that. And we
Thank
have
you.
a bodhicitta dedication prayer.
Please.
Um, well, actually, I'll do two. And but we can do them just in English. May the pure brilliant sun of bodhicitta dawn in each and every heart and mind, dispelling the darkness of suffering and confusion unstoppably until all are fully illumined and awakened. And then the dedication of the merit. By this ethical activity, may we swiftly realize the great perfection
Thereby
lift each and every being
to that
same state.
Thank you so much for your time and your focus.